During one rainy day in the San Fernando Valley, people deal with grief, addiction, and daddy issues. Special guest Adam Pincas joins us to chat about a Fiona Apple interpretive dance, why Tom Cruise hasn't won an Oscar, and the way that married people don't have sex. Then we find out if Magnolia stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with a glut. Alan says as a father, blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Test of Time, the podcast where we talk about older movies and see if they still stand up. I'm James Brief, and joining me as always is Alan Noah. Alan, how are you? It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too. I am doing very well, and tonight we are joined by a very special guest coming back on the show. It's our friend Adam Pincas.
Hey Al, how you doing? James, glad to be back. It's actually been a long time. When was the last time I did a recording?
You first joined us for our 50th episode, The Neverending Story. You were also here for Roadhouse and Footloose, and then Heat, and then Fight Club, and then Point Break. Point Break was the last episode you did with us, Adam, and that came out on July 9th, 2021. It has been a very, very long time, and I really wanted you to come back, and we were together recently, and you said, I've got hot takes. I was like, Adam, please come back on the show. And I know that you love Paul Thomas Anderson. I feel like you might be one of the few people I know who just casually refers to him as PTA. And I saw that it was the 25th anniversary of Magnolia, and I was like, Adam, you want to come on? And your eyes lit up. So it was perfect. I hate that it has been so long since your last appearance, but I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, I don't know why it's been so long. I guess it's just, I've seen you and we just haven't had a chance. And certainly that doesn't mean I haven't stopped watching movies and having lots of opinions on movies. And
right.
How many times I've been firing off things about Zack Snyder's Justice League and these crazy takes. And you look at me and you're like, save it for the podcast.
Yeah, which I guess is a rude, not nice thing to say to someone. So sorry. But yeah, that is kind of a default setting of mine. Sorry. So let's get into your love of PTA.
First of all, say, I love all movies.
Right.
Of all different types, genres, whatever, fun, silly. But serious adult movies that are beautiful and shot and by auteurs. Mm-hmm. Those are my true movies I love. Probably one of the reasons I love those movies is because of Paul Thomas Anderson. I guess in the 90s, there was this whole run. Remember, there's independent cinema.
Sure.
And they still have it, but it's just cinema.
Yeah.
And there was these true auteur directors, a lot of them that were just doing their own little thing that, when you saw it, you're like, oh, there's no other director that can make that kind of movie. And I feel he definitely fit into that group. So I saw Boogie Nights. I do not think I saw it in the theater. It was probably one of the earlier DVDs, if not the first 2 or 3 that I got. And I'll say right now, Boogie Nights is one of my favorite movies ever. I have watched it 100 times. I could pick it up at any scene. And it encapsulates so much of what I kind of like. I know people just think of it as the porn movie, but it's so layered. It's beautiful. The writing, you could so see the influences of who he loved, particularly Martin Scorsese. It essentially is the exact same structure as Goodfellas.
Yeah.
Literally to almost the minute. The way he uses the camera in Boogie Nights. All right, this podcast is now about Boogie Nights. You've done that. So then I went back. His first movie was Hard Eight. I bet few people have seen it. Gwyneth Paltrow and Philip Seymour Hoffman, but very, very early in their careers are in it. Hard Eight being a reference to gambling.
Okay.
And that combined with all of those other movies in the 90s that were really teaching me that movies weren't just about an entertaining story that made me feel good, that there was other things that could make a movie, special. So Magnolia has one of the best trailers ever. It is to Amy Mann's One, which is also a key song in the movie.
Right.
And I remember it was just a vignette of all the different plethora of characters. You really had no idea what the movie's about. Zero, but I was like hooked. I was so ready to go.
And PTA himself cut that trailer because he didn't like what the studio was doing.
I did not know that.
Yeah. There was a fight between PTA and the studio where they gave him full control after Boogie Nights. They said, go do whatever the hell you want.
Yes.
And he said, I will never get another chance like that. He took it, he ran with it, and he had final cut approval. He could do whatever he wanted and put whatever he wanted in the movie. But the studio did want to have a say over the poster and the trailer, and they really wanted to emphasize Tom Cruise, which makes sense. He's the biggest name. He's a movie star. He's in your movie, splash him on the poster, put him in the trailer. And PTA felt very strongly that that was not the right choice. And he edited the trailer that you saw himself.
He's like that kid who, at the age of 14, basically just made movies. Like, he's been obsessed. He is like one of those special people.
Yeah.
So he was dating Fiona Apple at the time.
Yes.
Who I was equally obsessed and love and also quite scared of. And so the idea that one of this director who I was becoming obsessed with was also dating Fiona Apple was this just major thing. And a lot of this movie is certainly influenced by her and him because according to all reports, the two of them did a lot of cocaine.
Apparently they had a volatile relationship. I believe her song Under the Table is about her relationship with PTA. They got along really well and they fed off of each other's creative energy until they didn't, and they fought a lot.
In two different worlds, they were artistic geniuses. And for a brief time, they inspired each other.
Yeah.
But then it ended poorly, although they're friends now.
Yes, and he still directs her videos.
I believe in 1999, her album When the Pawn, which is actually like a giant poem, but I'm going to summarize it.
Right.
Which is, at the time, an album I listened to a million times. And to this day, I listen to it. But at the exact same time, the Amy Mann-based soundtrack of this movie was also at it. And I remember listening to those two things, which I still listen to this day, just a lot. Like, I feel like I associate those two albums together.
It's almost, in a way, interesting that Amy Mann was his muse for this movie and not his girlfriend, Fiona Apple. Although, apparently, I read today that there's a lot of artwork that Fiona Apple painted that's in the movie. Like, in the scenes, in like every location, there is a picture of a magnolia, and many of them were painted by Fiona Apple.
Last random Fiona Apple thing, and then we'll move on.
Okay.
If you get the DVD of this movie, there is many vignettes and extras, and there is this weird vignette of her doing an interpretive dance.
Yes.
It's just strange and weird, and I had to add that.
I didn't get the movie on DVD, but I've heard of that, where she's doing an interpretive dance as the movie Magnolia while PTA is criticizing the movie, like what he thinks critics will say about the movie, even though the movie hasn't come out yet.
It's funny because the exact things he says are the exact criticisms that they came with about the movie.
So he was self-aware.
He's very self-aware.
Well, Paul Thomas Anderson is really well known for doing. He's had some pretty good music associated with his films. Boogie Nights, that soundtrack notwithstanding, but that's kind of easy because that's a '70s soundtrack. Pretty easy to have a good soundtrack if you want to. But There Will Be Blood, that was famously
Johnny
composed
Greenwood.
by the lead of Radiohead.
There Will Be Blood is amazing. It might take 2 or 3 viewings, honestly. Just let it truly set in. I will say The Master, which is the other movie that is unbelievable, that rivals Magnolia, I think, in pure acting chops. And that's actually Joaquin Phoenix, Paul Thomas Anderson, and Amy Mann. Although she's kind of on the sideline, but she has a couple like key scenes. That one's really his biggest powerful acting, big actors. There's a few movies, particularly There Will Be Blood, which is really, truly centered on one person. But most of his movies are a tapestry of different characters.
Yeah.
He really only has one movie which does not take place in either LA or the San Fernando Valley, specifically the San Fernando Valley.
What's that one?
Phantom Thread. That takes place in like 1940s, 1950s London. But even There Will Be Blood, it's about the oil rush that basically created the Southern California existence, in 1900. But that's sort of what he is giving a timeline of this area that he grew up in.
Yeah.
And although the master does kind of have different settings, the original setting at the beginning of the movie is in Southern California somewhere. I'm not necessarily sure. Random thing, but
Oh, cool.
it's just an interesting little thing about him.
That is interesting. Having not seen many of his films, I had only seen Boogie Nights and knew that took place in California. But for anyone that hasn't seen Magnolia, like me before, it weaves together the intersecting lives of several characters over the course of a single day. There's police officer Jim Curring, who responds to a noise complaint and meets Claudia Wilson, a cocaine addict. Claudia's estranged father is Jim Gator, a game show host dying of cancer. Stanley is a young contestant on Jimmy's TV show, and he's hoping to break the record set decades ago by whiz kid Donnie Smith. He's going broke paying for oral surgery that he doesn't need. And misogynistic motivational speaker Franklin Mackey, he sells an image of pure masculinity, but he's caught in a lie about his childhood during an interview. Meanwhile, his estranged father, Earl Partridge, is also dying of cancer. Earl's nurse, Phil, contacts Frank, hoping they can reconnect before Earl dies. And Earl's wife, Linda, is also an addict spiraling out of control about her marriage. Finally, everything comes to a head when it starts raining frogs. He had a $37 million budget for this one. It wound up making somewhere between $43 and $48 million domestically. It opened on December 17th, 1999, but that was only for the awards. It opened wide on December 7th, 2000. It never reached more than number 7 with $5.6 million, but it wound up making somewhere in the mid-40s million, so it made some profit. Probably wasn't as profitable as Boogie Nights.
The studio wasn't happy. It was critically acclaimed. There were critiques, but everyone said, yeah, it's not perfect, but obviously this guy is insanely talented. It's not a feel-good movie.
Sure.
It's not a date movie, unless you're my wife, and we went on a date to see it.
Oh, really?
My wife also likes movies.
Sure. She's been on the podcast before, too. We also need to have her back.
But at the same time, this is sort of the beginning of grown-ups weren't going to the movies as much, so it didn't make as much money. And the reality is teenagers were not going to see this movie. Well, I did, but other teenagers.
So the movie starts with this interesting sequence about coincidences and how these random things just happen. And you might not believe that these things happen, but they happen. And I believe that at least one of the stories in the movie is real. The one about the guy who was murdered and the 3 people who killed him had the name of the town or something, or that's at least an urban legend. And the scuba diver who is caught in the tree is also kind of an urban legend. But the one that they spend the most time on about the kid who tries to commit suicide but is murdered by his mother accidentally, that's a hypothetical thing that they teach in law school, apparently, or in some ethics classes about what would happen if this happened. So it's not a real thing, but it works as a thought experiment.
Yes, everything you said. This whole intro is about 18 minutes long.
Yeah.
And it starts this whole movie that at this point no one really knows what it's about, with this very odd vignette about the elements of chance and fate. It just introduces the idea that this isn't going to be your regular movie.
Right. Where it's not purely narrative focused. It's more about an idea or ideas in kind of a big picture way, and less about just a to B to C story.
This movie is 3 hours of lots of vignettes of characters. It's
fair.
They don't necessarily correspond. They're all their own little scenes.
It does have that kind of feel of vignettes rather than one cohesive story. All right, well, I think an easy way to talk about this movie is to kind of break it up with the characters, because it is just a lot of vignettes. So let's start with Frank Mackey, played by Tom Cruise. I saw this movie once before. I remembered very little, but I remember Frank Mackey. And his performance is, I think, peak Tom Cruise. I've never seen Born on the 4th of July, which I'm a little embarrassed to admit. I believe that's another role that he's known for doing a good job acting, I think. But like, this performance is unbelievable. Tom Cruise was nominated for an Oscar and he didn't win for Magnolia, and he hasn't won. I hope he wins one. You know, I'm rooting for the guy, I guess. But like, this is just an unbelievably amazing performance.
Yeah, I agree. This whole movie has amazing performances. Tom Cruise is like electric. But so the story goes is that he saw Boogie Nights. Mm-hmm. He called Paul Thomas Anderson and said, write a movie and I'll do anything you want. He wrote this movie. Tom Cruise threw himself into the role. And then when he didn't win the Oscar, he got very upset and he's been making Mission Impossible movies ever since.
I get that he likes doing those movies. He clearly enjoys the physicality of those stunts and those roles. And hey, you're Tom fucking Cruise, do whatever the fuck you want, right? But to me, it is a little bit of a bummer because after watching this movie, I'm like, shit, I want to see Tom Cruise do more roles like Frank Mackey and less Ethan Hunt jumping out of a plane onto a train that's on a skyscraper or whatever.
He's a good actor.
He's amazing.
Like that. Like, honestly, Tom Cruise is Tom Cruise, but he's a good actor.
I think he's usually a very good actor. I think he's an underrated guy because of his personal life, probably. He's done a couple quote-unquote odd things, jumping on the Oprah's couch and stuff, and he's part of a Scientology or whatnot. So I think people find him, a little bit less than, say, your more mainstream Harrison Ford, who's a well-regarded action movie and drama guy. So I think that's probably why he can't get an Academy Award, because most of it is it's voted for by Hollywood. Maybe he decided, fuck it, I'm just going to please the audience.
Pop quiz. Who won the Best Supporting Actor over Tom Cruise?
Oh, geez. Okay.
This would be what? So 2000. Was this the year Crash
This is
wins?
99.
99 is Sixth Sense. So is Bruce Willis No, Bruce Willis doesn't win. Haley Joel Osment. Does he win the Oscar? Best Supporting Actor in 1999?
I don't think Haley Joel Osment won an Oscar. I believe it was Michael Caine for Cider House Rules.
Boring.
I think you're right. I do remember reading that.
So in retrospect, come on. Like there's no question Tom Cruise should have won that award.
But like the whole Frank Mackey thing, from a test of time perspective, I think has aged, unfortunately, pretty well. Like his version of masculinity.
Remember, this is when Limp Bizkit and they had the Woodstock, and there was this whole very like angry man. This is when Maxim was super popular.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But there is a book by Neil Strauss. It's not The Pickup Artist.
It's called The Game, I think.
The Game.
Right?
Yeah.
And I remember I read like half of it and kind of was like, I don't care, so I stopped. Neil Strauss is an extremely famous author. I've read 2 books by him, and he essentially studied the art of picking up women.
Right.
And the whole book is about that, and he got really good at it. This is this weird time when that existed. I mean, I'm sure it still does, but I can't pick up anyone.
Well, I mean, you saw Magnolia with your now wife, so I think you didn't need any of those pickup tips. But I do think that, this was kind of a thing in the late 90s, early 2000s. At least from my perspective, I feel like maybe it didn't necessarily go away, but maybe kind of rescinded from public view for a bit. And now it is just back in full force. I mean, I have read and listened to too much shit post-election about the aggro men who didn't feel seen and, how they've all voted. But like this angry masculine energy that women are there for us men, like, that feels really fucking timely today.
I just have one thing to say.
Yeah.
Respect the cock.
Uh-huh.
tame the cunt.
Right.
You are referring, of course, to Frank Mackey's phrase that he says to these men at his seminars.
It's amazing because Tom Cruise, as you've said, is truly transcendent. But Paul Thomas Anderson is making fun of this exact archetype. Like, this whole thing is a joke on that character, of which Tom Cruise is not aware he's part of the joke.
Oh, you don't think Tom Cruise knows he's that it's being...
Well, no, I mean, I'm saying the character doesn't realize.
Okay.
I'm sure Tom,
Gotcha. Well, yeah, and I think, to me, the thing about this that feels dated is only that it's available on audio cassette.
As opposed to TikTok.
Exactly.
Or a paid seminar that you can pay a lot of money for.
That is what it is in Magnolia.
Right, that's exactly, so that stands up entirely.
There's a 1-800 number in Magnolia. Now it would just be, he's on YouTube and social media.
Now that's a great thing to ask kids that are younger than 20 today. 1-800. What does that mean? Isn't that just an area code or just something they give businesses? No, it's because back in the day, every phone call outside of basically your area code, even your little city, was considered long distance. So McDonald's and Microsoft, they would say, oh no, call us toll free 1-800, or even the dreaded 1990s 1-900, which was the exact opposite, and that would be like $3.99 a minute, which these Frank Mackey guys would sometimes do as well.
There's this small little running, well, at least I think it's a running joke in the TJ Mackey storyline, where he keeps saying, I'd like you to turn to page 66 of your orange book. I feel like now it would be on an iPad.
Yeah, it's the materials that he's giving out in the seminar.
It's either a chapter of his book or at least a section of the seminar. How to pretend you're a caring and sensitive person.
Wait, I'm going to correct you because I wrote it down. It made me laugh that hard. How to fake like you are nice and caring. And I mean, that is so fucking awful and terrible and funny at the same time. All of the scenes with Mackie, I think, are great. Let's move to his estranged father, Earl, and his caretaker, Phil, played by the late Philip Seymour Hoffman. I think Philip Seymour Hoffman is really good in this movie. I a little bit feel like his character doesn't have much to do. He's on the phone, trying to connect them.
Philip Seymour Hoffman is, rest in peace, one of the best actors we've had over the last 30 years. Listen, he's the smallest role in this movie.
Yeah.
He does not have one of the amazing speeches or some intense thing.
I kept waiting for something. I was waiting for, is he going to kill the old man? Is he going to he dropped some pills, which, later kills the dog. I was like, this is a major thing. That's going to have some major implication later because that one pill he dropped, it didn't get picked up. I was waiting for something to happen with his character. And I almost feel like if they cut his entire character, it would not have affected the movie that much.
True.
He does add a story element, is that he's the one that connects ultimately him to Frank.
Yeah.
He has cancer, he's dying, he's laying in bed. His son is estranged from him. His wife, who we'll get into, loves him, but she's also not there because she can't deal with death. And at the end of his life, it's a hospice nurse.
Yeah.
And maybe somewhere, this movie about loneliness and regret and connections. Or maybe I just made all that up and that's not it at all.
No, I think that's really insightful. Yeah, this guy who had everything, ostensibly, he was a big shot in TV, and now he's dying alone with the nurse. And just by the sheer willpower of that nurse and his unbelievable kindness, he gets to see his son right before he dies.
Jason Robards, who did have cancer, and he was a similar situation.
Yeah.
He gives a monologue to Philip Seymour Hoffman, maybe about 2/3 into the movie, is one of the most intense, powerful things I've ever heard an actor say.
It's a very powerful monologue that also feels real, like the way that he's licking his lips and the way that he's struggling to get the sentences out, and he's stuttering and he's a very sick old man. So it all feels genuine and real.
I've talked about PTA's camera work. He talks about many directors who have influenced him, and it's not a surprise. Like Scorsese is all over his stuff.
Sure.
So during that scene in which he gives, it's just really interesting because although this movie is a lot of talking, the camera never stops. It is always moving. It's zooming or it's sweeping or it's shifting. The camera starts on one side of the bed and it slowly, completely spins around to the other side of the room, then zooms in past Philip Seymour Hoffman's face, into Jason Robart. If it was just a stationary camera filming the speech, okay, still a great speech, but the way he uses the tools to enhance the viewing experience, those are the things that I love about him.
Frank's character, when he goes to Earl, we don't really know exactly what happens because there's always, the father is probably a stern father and a rebellious punk teenager, and the truth is halfway in the middle. He curses off this dad, and you could tell when he first sees his dad, there's a little hesitation. I noticed it. Tom Cruise looks at him and he was expecting with this strong, rich, mean old man that probably kicked him out of the house 10, 20 years ago. And he sees this frail man. But there's a speech that Frank has been practicing in his head for 20 years. You piece of shit. And as he's going through it, you could tell I'm not getting that juicy satisfaction. And we all have a speech we've said in our head to someone, a fantasy. They're going to react exactly how you want it to react, straight out of a screenplay. This guy didn't react that way, and Frank actually realizes, holy shit, this sad old man, and they know that he opens his eyes, sees his son.
It's two big scenes, and then I think he intercuts it with something else somewhere in between. I don't know why he does that. If it's they weird. Just did Tom Cruise's entire speech straight through, I think it would be it's amazing. And my father recently passed away, and having someone sick and watching, as you said, someone who was once one thing and then as they get older turn to something else, it's all real. Like that's why I think this movie works. They're not necessarily pleasant, but these are real people. At least I think they are.
For what it's worth, I didn't realize how much of this movie is about a father's death, and I'm sorry about that, and I appreciate you coming on and talking about these things and so soon after your dad died, and of course my condolences, and I've told you that and given you a million hugs and stuff before the podcast. But while we're on Earl, let's talk about his wife Linda, played by Julianne Moore. I love Julianne Moore. I kind of found this character and her portrayal of her a little grating. I get it. I get what she's going for. She's a drug addict. She can't deal with what's happening around her, and she's spiraling. I felt like every scene of her is her losing it. The scene at the pharmacy, I think, is hard to watch, but that's the point, right? But she does the same thing when she's talking to the doctor, and when she's talking to the lawyer, and when she's talking to Phil. And I felt a little too one note.
I think the purpose of her character is to be grating. And the reality of it is she is one note because she has lots of regrets. Mm-hmm. She sucked a lot of dicks.
Right. As she says to the lawyer.
As she says to the lawyer, I sucked a lot of dicks. I cheated on him many times. Drugs and mania and mental health. Honestly, that's what she would be like. She's going to the doctor, basically saying, I'm losing my mind, help me. He writes her a prescription. Then she goes to the lawyer. She basically says, I'm losing my mind, help me. The lawyer kind of shoves her away. Then she goes to the pharmacy. They look at her, and the reality is maybe they're not even looking at her weird. She's just so out of, on whatever, painkillers or Valium. But I agree. She's grating and upsetting. I think Julianne Moore is so over the top, but I love it.
Okay.
And that speech she gives in the pharmacy is just classic. I mean, yes, it is over the top completely, but I just feel like that's really what the character would be like. Mania. I mean, drug mania. anxiety mania, fear of what's happening, guilt mania.
You're not wrong.
It's really hard to understand that level of mania unless you've been there. And I think she really hits it. But the finality of her is she overdoses in her car in a parking lot, and then an ambulance takes her away. Her character story arc is pretty straightforward. It's depressing as hell, I will say, and upsetting, highly upsetting at times.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the other drug addict character in the movie, Claudia, who is addicted to cocaine. And I think her performance is kind of in that same ballpark as Julianne Moore, where it's very over the top. I think I like Melora Walters' performance more than Julianne Moore's, just because the way that she struggles to get out every word, every movement that she makes feels like she is forcing herself to do it, to try to act normal around Jim, the cop. For me, I felt like I felt what she was going through, so I appreciated that about her performance.
Although she's often criticized the most by critics, I think her performance is unbelievable. Like, she's listening, but she's jittering, and she's answering, but at the same time, her answers are kind of weird. The tiny little nuances, and it's the whole time. It's not just that initial scene, even when they're at dinner, which is a very weird scene, and she's struggling. You could see, like, she has all these things inside of her that she's desperately trying to say. She has no one to say them. And then here's this person that's like, say them. It makes you uncomfortable. I just think it's, once again, a painful performance. But this is a painful movie about people in pain.
Yeah.
And she also happens to be a crazy coke addict. I mean, she does a lot of cocaine in this movie.
You know, the thing I found very interesting about that storyline is you have this character, the guy that Philip Baker Hall plays, Jimmy Gator. He is this beloved game show host. And there was another very famous personality in Great Britain. His name was Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile was this beloved media personality. The kids loved him, and he was on the radio, and he molested a ton of kids. And oh wait, oops, yeah, that's basically this Jimmy Gator guy. And this guy does kids shows. He's not a good guy.
Yes, yes, yes. It is not revealed to the end of the movie that this person has molested his daughter. Probably one of the big reasons why she is as not healthy as she is. The way that scene is done, any other movie, it would be completely different. The way the wife reacts, the way he responds, it's done in such an uncomfortable way. Like, it literally, you're like, oh my God, this is what he's going to say. Like, all of a sudden it clicks that he molested his daughter. And it's these little things that PTA does that, like, I don't think other directors do.
I wound up watching the introduction, not the introductory 19th century part, but basically the ensemble. Let me introduce all these characters at once, from Stanley to the quiz kid in the 60s, all at once again. You're introduced to Claudia because just some guy comes up to her and basically says something in her ear. She has some coke. He's like, is that good enough? And she basically has sex with him, and she's not looking at him. Even those 3 hours, I recommend giving it maybe 5 more minutes and watching that intro again. You know, skip the 19th century part, but the intro of the modern day characters.
That same exact scene with her father, he's in his office with all his awards. There's a picture of his family on the nightstand, and you see it's the daughter, but a much younger version of the daughter.
Well, I actually didn't even notice it was younger because it introduces the game show host, and he's so beloved, and he's on Entertainment Weekly saying, oh, really? Have I been on 12,000 hours? Has it been that long? He's in his twilight years. He's getting all these awards probably, and you see all his Emmys, and he's banging some woman in a cocktail dress who you can note, because I've seen the film now, she has very dark black hair, this woman he's having sex with in a cocktail dress, and his wife is very clearly blonde. So he's very clearly in the opening scene, he's cheating on his wife, even though he's so beloved by America.
No married people have sex like that. Okay? That is only cheating sex. Okay? Let me just tell you. That's...
We've seen sex like that in one other film that you reviewed with us, and
Roadhouse,
you pointed
baby.
out. That's right, Roadhouse. The sex at like 4 feet up on the wall.
Oh my God.
With Patrick Swayze.
I can't imagine the abrasions that Kelly Lynch had.
Oh my God. That's really fucking funny. I want to unpack something you said though. You said that Jimmy Gator molested his daughter. You said it as kind of a definitive statement. The movie kind of sort of leaves it as a question mark. You're rolling your eyes. You think it's
Come
clear.
on. Yeah, it's clear.
He can't get himself to say it. He remembers all these affairs. He's admitting to his wife everything, all these terrible things he did as a bad husband. And that one thing, he wasn't ready to talk about that. He's ready to either be, get the vase thrown at him, or she's going to forgive him. Either way, he's dead in 2 months. He's trying to get this off his chest. He was not ready to get off that thing.
I think when you say admitting to his things, I think regret and forgiveness are two of the main points of this movie.
Sure.
He tells his wife, who's obviously this very loving, caring, and he says, I cheated on you a lot. And she sits there sipping on her vodka and ice. She goes, well, I'm really not that angry. I mean, I am, but I'm not that angry. And then she kind of walks away, and you're, even as a viewer, you're like, okay, that didn't go as I thought that was going to go. And
right,
as I said,
yeah.
PT, the camera's kind of like awkward in the room. And then all of a sudden she's like, but I have one question for you. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, as soon as she says that, that's when it clicked in my head. And I was like,
Yeah.
Oh.
I assumed she was going to say that she had tons of affairs too, which was going to be the more obvious response. But no, she goes definitely the other way.
And she asks him, why does our daughter hate you? And other movies would have a conclusion. You'd have, this is the end. Oh, I know the answer. And although we all think we know the answer, he just keeps saying, I don't know. I don't remember. I don't know. So is that implying he was drunk? I'm not sure.
I interpreted it that, yes, he did molest her.
Me too.
But I couldn't help but think that the reason it's somewhat, at least on paper, ambiguous was because it is very close to the end of the movie, and we have spent almost 3 hours with this character, not exclusively because it's an ensemble, but we've spent time kind of maybe liking this guy, even though he's not a particularly likable character, to now find out that he molested his daughter. If it's definite, then it's a brutal gut punch to the audience. If it's a maybe, then you can say, ooh, I wonder.
No,
It's the end of Sopranos.
Yeah, the end of Sopranos, you're referring to the fact it goes blank. Does Tony Soprano get killed at the end? I think this one leads you a little bit more towards the thing that you and I are thinking, Adam, that he did.
And that's why I think your statement about what he's willing to admit and try to be forgiven for, or at least get off his conscience, he's willing to get this other thing, but he's still not prepared to even admit out loud what he probably knows. That was those layers of what we're willing to admit versus what we're not. And I just think that, because I think we all have that inside.
Right.
We haven't talked about Jim the cop, played by John C. Reilly. I love John C. Reilly. I think that this character is frustrating in his incompetence, and I think that's kind of the point. And when he's on his date with Claudia and he confesses how he's incompetent, and she's like, oh, you're so put together, you're a cop, and he's like, I lost my gun today, and like they share that connection. I really like that moment. I think that's probably my favorite part of the movie that's not with Tom Cruise. But I couldn't really tell if you're supposed to like him before that, if he's supposed to be this kind of affable dimwit who's trying his best but isn't maybe so great at his job, or if he's just kind of an asshole. Like before he gets to Claudia, when he goes to the other woman's apartment, he is super fucking aggressive as he's yelling at this woman. And then we find out that there's a dead body in her closet, which, okay, fine. It's a good thing that he was pressing her and found out about the body. But he comes in fairly hot with Claudia, but not as hot as he did with the black woman. I didn't really know how to feel about this guy.
I understand the character's role in the movie. At the end of the movie, there's a speech about forgiveness, finding forgiveness in your heart, and I understand it all. But there's definitely about 15 to 20 minutes of his storyline that could be cut out. When he loses his gun, like it goes on, and maybe that's him trying to get you as frustrated with the character as probably other people. I don't know. I'm making that up, but I agree with you. Great actor, love him. There's just too much of him in the movie.
My interpretation of it was that he's supposed to be as close to a proxy for the audience as we get. He's our everyman. He's our guy just going through life, and he's gonna figure it out. And I don't think he works as that. Maybe I'm misinterpreting PTA's intentions.
That's not how I necessarily see it. However, when he finally does knock on Claudia's door and she's blasting the music and she is frantically going through her apartment trying to clean up all the cocaine everywhere.
He's completely oblivious in that scene. He doesn't even know the fact that she's shaking from a mixture of drugs and anxiety. This cop does not even pick up on that.
It's funny though, because I think the whole point is he is incompetent, but he's pretending to be what he thinks a cop should be. After they find the dead body, they're going through the details of the crime, and he tries to interject with the detail, and they they zip him immediately.
Sure.
So kind of showing that he's not respected. And then there's this little kid who's essentially saying, I know who did it. If you give me some money, I'll tell you who did it. And he is so clueless to this little kid. Then the little kid gives him this little rap.
Yeah.
I have never sat down and actually listened to the words of his rap, but I'm very curious what they are, because knowing Paul Thomas Anderson, they probably have something to do with the movie.
So I looked up the lyrics of the rap. Because, high five.
High five.
Because I was thinking the same thing. So it's two things. One is there's symbolism in it where he's talking about the oppressor that's been on his neck, and he's kind of talking about the oppressive fathers that are in the movie. I think he mentions rain at one point, which obviously kind of foreshadows the frogs. But there's also, he's talking about the worm, and the worm is a character who's played by Orlando Jones, who is the person who committed the murder of the body in that first woman's apartment. And you're thinking, Orlando Jones isn't in this movie. You're right. He filmed scenes that were all cut. Some of that rap is talking about things that were cut from the movie. And so it's not super literal about the murderer, but it maybe is if those scenes are in the movie. Otherwise, it's just kind of big picture symbolism.
Well, you know what? This was the buildup. I feel like he made a mistake here. If this movie was made 8 years later, then the rap would have meant more.
Maybe.
He was still developing his skills.
Sure. I do just want to talk a little bit about the two whiz kids. You have whiz kid Donnie Smith, that is how he's credited, played by William H. Macy. And then you have Stanley, the little kid, who's trying to break Donnie's record. I like William H. Macy. I think he is convincing as just a hapless loser who doesn't know what to do in life. I kind of like his character. The whole thing about the braces and the oral surgery is why on earth would he go in for oral surgery, which is what his boss, Alfred Molina, tells him.
I didn't realize that's Alfred Molina. And that's awesome because Alfred Molina plays the crazy drug dealer at the end of Boogie Nights. So, and now I like that. He just got fired from his job. He's getting braces. You have no idea why.
Right.
And he walks into a bar. Paul Thomas Anderson loves his tracking shots. And the tracking shot goes into the bar and tracks Donnie all the way to the corner where he sits down in a booth. And then it kind of lingers for a second. And then he smokes a cigarette. And in reality, nothing's really happening.
Yeah.
But then the camera kind of spins around and then zooms in towards the bar, towards the bartender. And then you see this old dude who was the old guy, I think, in The Burbs.
Oh, I think you're right. Okay.
And then all of a sudden the bartender smiles and you see the braces. The setup and ultimate reveal is just these tiny little things. The scene I can't stand is once Donnie goes to talk to the old guy and he's screaming, "I got so much love to give." That scene, I go, if I can, I fast forward through.
Why? It just feels like a little too overwrought?
If a movie where I think is full of people that I really believe exist, Donnie screaming in the bar, "I've got love to give," maybe, like, is he drunk? I don't know. That just doesn't drunk. Seem, I don't know, I could be wrong, but
it just doesn't feel believable to you?
Yeah, I don't know.
All right. The thing that didn't feel believable at all to me is with the other whiz kid, Stanley, a kid who needs to go to the bathroom and the producer refuses to let him go to the bathroom. It's like during a commercial break and she's like, "No, you can't." I can't imagine a producer telling a kid not to go to the bathroom. I get what they're going for. It's live TV. No, go to the fucking bathroom. Although apparently that was based on an experience that Fiona Apple had in real life that she told PTA about. But like, yeah, let the kid pee. If it's a live show, do a little banter with the other people, wait for him to go to the bathroom.
I agree with you. It's something that could happen. They should have done a better job to explain why can't this kid go to the bathroom. I kept wondering that because there's plenty of time. It's live TV. There has to be a way to empty the bladder of all those SNL actors and actresses during those 90 seconds they have off. It seems weird.
Yeah.
His father, Paul Thomas Anderson, his father was a voice actor. He was the voice that announced Charlie's Angels.
Okay.
I don't think I've ever seen Charlie's Angels, like the TV show.
Yeah,
but
me neither.
And he also announced like the intros for game shows, like, "And now we're gonna have." All right. So what I'm really getting at is this whole show business, game show, like this world was a world he grew up in. I don't know if any of those kids peed themselves, but once again, it just brings some of his own life into the movie.
Yes. And also in that first scene when they get to the studio, that is a very Scorsese-esque oneer going through the studio. The camera follows them on an elevator, which I watched twice because it's impressive how the camera like goes on the elevator with them and then quickly gets off and gets out of their way and then follows them up and down the hallway. I really love that shot. That's a great oneer.
In Boogie Nights, the oneer at the beginning when they go into the club from outside the club,
yeah,
like they were trying to figure out how he did that for like years. Like that, I don't particularly know the technicals, but I guess that was like really insane at the time.
Any shot like that is impressive. Like it is just a masterclass in filmmaking. But the other thing about Stanley I want to bring up as we get to the end of the movie is when the frogs start raining. What Stanley says is, I think, a very, very important line because it's raining frogs, which is fucking hard to believe. But he says, this is something that happens. He's saying it to himself, but he's also saying it to the audience. Because as crazy of a thing as that is, it is something that happens. There are storms where animals are like picked up from one place and dropped someplace else. At least there are reports of it. Yeah, it's not a thing you see in a lot of movies. It's certainly unexpected in this movie, but it is a thing that happens.
Are we at the point where I could give you my "What do the frogs represent" speech?
Please do. I'd love to hear your speech.
All right. So the beginning of the movie is coincidences, right?
Yeah.
So the idea of fate, taking over or something pushing our lives or some things happening for strange reasons. At the point that the frogs come down, it's not necessarily that they change the events of what's going on, but it happens all at significant emotional moments. And I think the frogs represent fate. It changed people's lives. It could be anything, right? Anything that happens could be the thing that changes or pushes you or be a weird coincidence. The frogs just are a weird because I think it's biblical, representing it. And then the kid saying it's something that happens. It's not really about the frogs. It's about life, like weird. shit happens.
Right. And you have to make sense of it even when it feels nonsensical. It is a thing that happened, and you have to not just say, I don't believe it, I don't believe it. You have to accept it. This is something that feels very close to home with me lately. Accepting crazy things that have happened, you have to fucking accept it. It rained frogs. Trump won. Like, shit, crazy shit happens. There's only so many times you can say, isn't that crazy? Before you just have to accept, but it fucking happened. That's kind of the point, is the acceptance of these crazy things that he introduces in the beginning of the movie.
Oh my God. Claudia's reaction to the frogs when she's doing coke and all of a sudden they come down is pretty funny.
Yeah.
But I always find it odd that they're just like, right at the end, they're just like, oh, there's frogs.
It's weird, but I think the thing is that they have other things to think about. It happens when Frank is with his father, and the frogs falling is what wakes his dad up, so he gets to see him. So that's really significant. It's when Linda is in the ambulance going to the hospital after she's overdosed, and the ambulance flips over. WizKid Donnie Smith, it knocks him out, and so then the cop sees him, and he's just trying to get him to safety. So all of these other things are more pressing than why the fuck is it raining frogs? Also, by the way, the frogs are very biblical, and it's a reference to chapter 8, verse 2 of Exodus. Paul Thomas Anderson, not a religious guy, did not know that raining frogs was in the Bible. He wrote it in his script, and then people said, oh, like the Bible. And he said, huh? What? What do you mean?
Aren't there multiple biblical references? I'm reading this right from the internet, right?
Yes.
Paul Thomas Anderson. Okay, you're nodding yes. So how could a person who's not familiar with the Bible, he obviously referenced it.
Yeah, there's a million references to Exodus 8:2 in this movie. When he first wrote the draft, he was unaware of its biblical implications. There was some author that he loved. You see Stanley reading the book in one of the scenes in the library that wrote about raining frogs. And then when people told Paul Thomas Anderson it's from the Bible, he then put a million references to Exodus 8:2 in the movie. Both things are true. He wrote it without realizing
They told him when they read the script.
Yes, correct.
And then he added the references later?
Yes, into the movie. Apparently there are tons and tons and tons of 8-2s in this movie.
That you don't understand. That's going to keep me happy. Like, I love this stuff.
That's great. So now you're going to watch this movie again because you clearly love it. The next time you watch it, keep an eye out for 8-2s. In like the beginning with Patton Oswalt, he's a blackjack dealer. The guy says, I really need a 2. And then he gets an 8. And then he gets mad and he tackles him. That's like one of many examples of an 8 and a 2.
In Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, we find out that the spider that bit Miles Morales is really from Earth 42.
Okay.
So then if you go back and watch Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and I know because my son has like discovered every one, all over the movie is the number 42.
Okay. But Adam, I want to ask you what you think about Magnolia as a whole. Do you think the movie stands the test of time?
I think this movie stands the test of time for grown-up adults who like film and cinema, not just movies. To watch something depressing or sad or real, life is real. We want to escape in these things.
Sure.
And yes, I often want to escape in my things, but I also love being forced to feel stuff. And this is that kind of movie. It's not perfect. I think we all agree it's probably 20 minutes and easily could be cut out. But there's so much in this movie that is just really superb. And knowing what he ultimately would go on to do, as someone who sort of likes to grow up with their artists as they grow up and kind of see the progression of them, this leads to what many people consider to be one of the greatest runs of cinema making, not necessarily popcorn movie making. And there's something about this movie beyond just the movie that beyond stands the test of time. Amy Mann's soundtrack is considered not just a soundtrack, but is considered to be one of the better albums of music released of that time period. And as someone who owns it and has listened to it many times, it's, if you haven't heard it, I recommend you do. It stands alone without the movie. I think the soundtrack really stands out, and the movie and the soundtrack are connected forever.
They are. And my only thing about that is that I think Wise Up, the song that they kind of lip sync to, is just not the best Amy Mann song on the soundtrack. Save Me, which ends the movie, is so much better. I mean, that is just such a better track. And I'm not saying that like I want to see all the characters lip sync to that one too, or instead of, but it's just such a far superior track, in my opinion.
I agree with that take.
So you think it stands the test of time?
It stands the test of time, but probably not for 17-year-olds.
All right. James, what do you think?
I think this film was too long. It's really too long. But what I do really like about this film is kind of the way the film deals with death. And that's something that's just not done very well in art. It's usually death is some kind of revenge, or it's a, amazing closure. And I feel like a couple of the people here were a little surprised. Like, my deathbed confession of the adultery. I was a bad little boy, wasn't I? But I love you, dear. Oh, shit. This did not go the way I thought it was. Now I'm basically going to die, having come out in the open that I pretty much molested the daughter for that character. And it's very surprising. Tom Cruise's character thinks he's going to tell off dad, and then in the end has a real nice moment with his dad before he dies, and probably helps Frank too. And it's just a very well done film. I think could be better. You say, interestingly, I don't think it holds up for 17-year-olds. I would say this does not hold up for impatient people. I think a 17-year-old could see it fine, but it's a long film, and it's not a 3-hour film that just 3 hours are going to go by and you just don't even realize it. No, you're going to realize it. You might look at your watch once or twice, especially during some of the unnecessarily long scenes. But overall, I think it's a nice film. I really like the Earl Partridge's terminal lucidity. Like, as just before he dies, he has this moment of clarity in that speech he says to Philip Seymour Hoffman's character. Flawed as it may be, in terms of its length, mostly, that's its only flaw, I think the film does stand up. It's a nice film I'd never seen before, and thanks for having me see it, Adam. I enjoyed watching it.
It's long, and it's a emotional long. I feel that as I get older, I feel things more.
Sure. So
even I, at some points, was like, whew. I appreciate this movie now so much more than even though I was a movie guy when I was 20, I know more about film. I know more about cinema. This guy's like the Kubrick of our generation. Makes a movie every 6 years. So it is a movie that I think you have to appreciate a certain type of thing. And also it's the kind of movie that in some ways you notice more things each time. So there is a rewarding element, but I don't disagree with you. It's long, and it's a heavy long.
And I wish there was a DVD release for those that want the 3.5-hour version. But yeah, there's a really good 2 hour and 30-minute film in here that would be better than this one we got.
But that is not Paul Thomas Anderson.
Right.
Like, for the record, he will never do that. When this movie came out, he said, I don't think I will ever make a better movie. Looking back on it now, he says he regrets saying that. He's embarrassed that he ever said that.
And he has said that he would cut 20 plus minutes, although he never specified what the minutes are.
All right, so Al, that's 2 for 2. Do you think Magnolia stands the test of time?
First, I want to just address what you said about the shorter cut that exists in your imagination. I think people would still be angry at that cut because the ending would still be it rains frogs and these characters don't get much resolution. And yes, you certainly could cut stuff and probably entire characters and scenes, and it would still be the same kind of thing. But I think that while the length bothered you a lot, I have read a lot of criticisms about the raining frogs and how, it just kind of ends and there's not really closure. And lessons learned, and we all move on in our lives because of these raining frogs. Now we understand blah blah blah, and now I'm able to move forward with my grief or my anger or depression or whatever because I learned some lesson. Like, that's not what this movie is. I think that what this movie does is it's more about evoking feelings. And I think that's kind of what you're picking up on, Adam, that it's more about how it makes you feel than telling more of a cohesive narrative in the way that we're used to with film. Movies kind of, following similar structures and, 3 acts and things like that. To me, I thought this movie was more poetic than narrative. And I appreciated that. I appreciated what he was going for. And kind of along those lines, I think I appreciate this movie more than I enjoy it. I think there's more about it that I can look at, kind of like what you're saying about the camera and the music and stuff, and be like, good stuff there. But like, I don't know that I'm going to want to revisit it like you have.
I get that. I just think I really like emotional pain.
Okay. Well, fair enough. And kind of going back to the movie's length, I think part of the thing that kind of bothered me about it is that there's a lot of duality. You have 2 women who are addicted to drugs. You have 2 old men who are dying of cancer. You have 2 game show kids. You have 2 suicide attempts. You have 3 cheaters, people who admit to cheating on their wife. You have 3 shitty dads, maybe even 4 if you count Donnie's, who he talks about, even though he's not a character. So there's so much repetition in this movie that for me doesn't work because there's no real contrast. How is this old guy dying from cancer different from this old guy dying from cancer? How is this whiz kid a cautionary tale for this younger version of a whiz kid? It just kind of felt like you could have consolidated some of these characters, to me anyway. Even though I think this movie is flawed, I agree that it's too long. I didn't like some of the acting in it. I thought some of it was overacted, but there is a lot of really great stuff in here. All of the scenes with Tom Cruise are next level. There are other great performances, but I got a lot out of this movie. I got a lot out of the experience. And I want to live in a world where directors are kind of given this carte blanche to do whatever the fuck they want and make these big opuses. Some of them will hit, some will miss, but like, cool. That's the world I want to live in. I want to see these movies. I'm always going to be here for a big swing. This movie is a big swing. It's definitely not for everybody, but I think it stands the test of time. I mean, there's not a lot in here that doesn't work 25 years later just based on the passage of time. I think the main themes of coincidence, fate, regret, grief, addiction, shitty dads, all of these things are just as relevant now as they were 25 years ago. So yeah, it stands the test of time.
I agree with you. And as much as I feel that way and feel that way about this movie, when I look at PTA's filmography, I consider There Will Be Blood and The Master to be like A+.
Okay.
I consider The Phantom Thread and Boogie Nights to be like an A. I consider this like the 3rd tier down. I'm not sure where I think Licorice Pizza is because I haven't seen it. I have seen it multiple times, and there's actually Inherent Vice I've seen like 15 minutes of. So I need to see that. But there's 4 movies of his that I consider better than this one.
Fair. And I think that is a commonly held belief. I think that there are other PTA heads. I don't know if there's a better name for them. But yeah, that they kind of echo what you just said, that this is not his best, but, still worth watching. Adam, thank you so much for coming on and joining us. And I love this conversation. Thank you so much for coming back on, Adam.
Anytime. I love hanging out with you guys. I love your apartment. It's got tons of video games.
Welcome anytime.
And yeah, when no one's around, these are the conversations I have in my head. You know what I mean? Like, same thing with music. So it's always nice to have some people to share all these crazy thoughts about random things I'm listening to or watching. So anytime. You mentioned the movies that I've done. Other than The Neverending Story, which is like a good movie, but like, come on. They're literally some of my favorite movies ever. I would like to do a movie that maybe I don't like and maybe my opinion will change, or maybe even a movie I've never seen before.
Whatever movie you want to come on to talk about, a favorite, a never before seen gem, or whatever the fuck, you're always welcome. Let's not wait 3 more years to have you back, though. Let's do this again soon, please.
Absolutely.
Thank you again for joining us. That's going to do it for us this week. Next week, we're going to be talking about The Towering Inferno. This was a movie that I think you had brought up somewhere along the line, James, and I saw that it was having its 50th anniversary, and I was like, oh yeah, let's watch The Towering Inferno.
Yeah, it was the #1 film of 1974, I guess, of its 50th anniversary.
Yes.
So let's see if it stands up.
Let's. In the meantime, we want to hear your thoughts on Magnolia and Tom Cruise and if he'll ever win an Oscar and raining frogs and what they mean. We are at Testing Time Pod on Facebook, X, Instagram, and Threads. You can email us, thetestingtimepodcast@gmail.com. And we'll see you next time, everyone.
Bye.
Say goodbye, Adam.
Goodbye, Adam.
Dad joke.